Let's turn our minds to supply of zinc. And on the screen you can see 5 years of annual production around the world. You can see there at the very bottom, if we look down, if we look down the bottom here, you will see the total world production of zinc in the last 5 years. And you can see there that it's sort of growing reasonably steadily since 2010, 12,500 tonnes. 12.5 million tonnes, because these are thousands of tonnes. So 2014, the world produced not quite 13.5 million tonnes of zinc. The key producers that you can see there is China. China is far and away the biggest producer of zinc around the world, and everyone else is the second best, really. You can see Australia, Peru, Europe, and other countries. But China is the key producer of zinc around the world. Production between 2014 and 2013 did increase, and so we have sort of a moderate increase, and it's worth keeping a note of that percentage, because we'll talk about the issues of supply and demand a bit later on in the talk. And so it's really only, production has only grown 1.4% between 2013 and 2014. We're going to contrast that with the demand usages shortly. So zinc is produced in very many different countries. Whilst China may very well be the dominant zinc producer, zinc is produced in a whole range of different countries around the world. And you can see there the colours of the various countries which show you the key producers. So China there in red, you've got Australia and North America, and some of the South Americas there as well. But as I said, China, the production comes from a whole range of different places. And this is the reason for putting this in here. This is a chart which shows the typical cost of production of zinc. And as you go from the left side to the right side of this chart, it's a cost. And you can see there that most of the producers of zinc are sitting somewhere between $13.20 and $17.60 per tonne of zinc. It's costing them to produce zinc. What I really want to show here is not so much the trend, but zinc is quite an important mineral and metal to show because of this particular part of the cost structure. This is the treatment charges, the treatment and refining charges that the zinc producers have to incur to convert their zinc ores into zinc metals. And it's a very substantial part of the cost of producing zinc. And a number of the other metals that we use around the world don't have that same high proportion of costs associating with treatment and refining charges. So that's really the only reason for showing you that particular slide.
Mark, you said that there were quite a number of opportunities in Southeast Asia. Can you elaborate a little bit as to where they are and what the barriers are to developing, which you were alluding to in your presentation?
Thank you, Mark. Well, zinc, probably the key markets or the key locations for zinc, as you saw, most people would have seen the global map. Zinc is pretty well located in most parts of the world. So Southeast Asia does not, interestingly, have less zinc than a lot of those other locations. There is zinc in Indonesia. We have some zinc in the Philippines and Malaysia, not so much in Malaysia. So the locations are there, and the attractiveness of the zinc deposits geologically and mining process, they are there. The impediments, depending on which country you're in, they could be more political impediments, more requirements for processing in country versus straight export of concentrate.
Like Indonesia, presumably.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I wasn't going to name them. I'm glad you did.
Well, Azman's sitting next to me, and speaking Bahasa and being very active in the Indonesian market, you'd be the perfect candidate to talk about that. But just to finish off on the geology just for a moment, Mark, does that mean that there is zinc there, we just haven't found it yet?
Well, we know that there's zinc in Indonesia, for example.
It didn't feature in your list, though, of reserves and resources.
No, because it just doesn't quite rate as to the bigger producers. But certainly there are a number of zinc deposits already found and in various stages of assessment in Indonesia, so that's fine. They tend to be the slightly smaller ones. than some of the big deposits. Some of the individual big deposits are, I think I mentioned Mount Isa. Mount Isa has been running for 80 to 100 years, not quite 100 years, but it's been running a very long time. Broken Hill, running 100 years. Rosebery in Australia, running 100 years. So, there may be a time when we find enough zinc to have deposits running that length of time in Indonesia, but we're not quite there yet in terms of discovery of those deposits.
And Azman, have you had any contact with prospective miners of zinc in Indonesia?
Perhaps not particularly zinc. I suppose it's what Mark said earlier on. There are reasons why investors and mining companies flock to certain jurisdictions. And perhaps this particular case, Indonesia is very close to my heart, so I will not mention names anymore. So it comes down to this. I think if you look at the kind of the extent of zinc mining that takes place in this country, the mining activities are not particularly large, and I think there are existing laws which, although is designed to promote a certain level of activity within the mining industry, it is not doing exactly that because of the high costs of setting up smelting and refining plants and so on and so forth. So as a result of which, you find that investors are shying away largely from a place like that, where in order for you to export the raw ore, you will have to comply with additional investment requirements.
Fortunately, I have no such political restrictions. So let's call a spade a spade. Indonesia is trying to add value to its ore reserves. And so rather than just ship it off at the port to be developed elsewhere or processed elsewhere, they want people to establish processing facilities in country. But what you're saying is that in actual fact, that's not happening.
That's not happening. It's having a reverse effect, and the downturn in the commodity sector is actually exacerbating the problem. So I think it'll be some time before we see this correcting itself.
Have you spoken to the president about, as you usually do, about reversing this policy?
Well, I think sometimes, unfortunately, when new laws are passed, it's very difficult to undo them. I think I will probably seek Pak Sanusi's assistance on that to go and see Pak President some of these days.
Okay.
I may just say that one of the impediments currently in Indonesia, if we're focused very much on Indonesia, is you do need to have confidence that you've found enough ore reserves to sustain the further capital investment of smelting and refining. And I'm dubious that Indonesia currently has really defined enough ore reserves for there to be a great deal of confidence to invest in that next stage of in-country processing. Some of the other metals in Indonesia, you're already past that point. So you're not at that, you don't have that issue. But zinc, I think, is still, we'd have to argue there that maybe we just have not yet defined enough zinc in country to justify that next step.
Okay, and Malaysia was also on your list of countries that might be of interest. Are things easier there, Mark?
Well, certainly there's quite a lot of activity going on in Malaysia at the moment with respect to other commodities. I haven't seen a lot of zinc exploration focus in Malaysia at the present time, but there's certainly significant focus on other commodities. So clearly, the companies that are doing that work are thinking that there's merit in continuing to do that work. A lot of them are Malaysian-based companies themselves, so they're not necessarily the big international miners spending money in Malaysia. So it's perhaps a different focus.
Azman, seeing that you speak Bahasa, obviously that finds application in Malaysia too. Any customers there?
No, not necessarily. I think one thing unique about Indonesia is that if you look at the mining industry and the mining laws, there are interesting impediments, if you like, for the foreign investor. There are rules for you to comply before you alter the shareholding, for example. There is a graduated scale. There are also graduated scale for divestment. And I think while all this is well and fine, I suppose in the spirit of encouraging investors to add new value to mining investments into Indonesia, I think such additional requirements tend to have the opposite effect in a situation where commodities tend to go through a cycle. When it's on the downward spiral, I think you're waiting for it to bottom out and then come up again. I think it's it would seem that there's very little activity that's going on in Indonesia relating to mining.
And what about Malaysia?
I see much less in Malaysia. I suppose my current level of involvement has always been with Indonesia and largely to do with mining companies on our stock exchange. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Sanusi. I'm Executive Director of Mineral, a zinc mining company. Which, today and Mark, we have a same common interest. The regulations where recently I've heard of, maybe Pak Asman can elaborate more further, that the BKPM, the investment board has 2 weeks ago, probably, that would be the main coordinators for the mineral resource investment, that the investor will just seek advisory directly with the BKPM instead of going to the mines department or through this forestry department?
Okay, I'm not quite sure about that new ruling, but I am aware that what used to be the forte of the Bupati has been taken away to go to the governor now. So in most areas, there's a more central control for the issuance of the IUPs. But I think, as in any new change in regulations in Indonesia, I think it usually takes some time to quite understand how things will work out before. But I suppose I will probably take it up and try to determine for you whether that there's really a change or whether there's just a restatement of. So you're saying that BKPM actually now is the central...
Taking over, I think there was mines department people has give us some information that in future for coordination have to go to BKPM. But technically, it was still via the mines department.
I see.
Yeah.
So it will probably be an internal arrangement between themselves and the mining department.
The issue
MEMR.
is a bit complicated for foreign investors.
Yes.
That you have to run all the department. In our case, we have obtained various licenses, obviously to different stages from the Bupati, which is the local government, and obviously now it's become the jurisdiction is going to the governor.
That's right.
Yeah. So forestry also another application which is very crucial. So you need to have all the related department to be to get the endorsements, and then the mobilizations, the official mining can comments and according to the regulations. So I believe the government is trying very hard to put things together, but this probably need sometimes from now. But the directions is in the right directions now.
Probably.
Yeah,
I think,
BKPM is quite. This issue has been talking again and again. A few years back, and recently it said there has been implementation of this issue. But I think we can check further how efficient that will be. Right?
Thank you, Pak Sanusi.